Well, I'm going to do a demonstration of making some textured surfaces that go above and beyond the ones that that are in that video that I posted for you guys to watch. This has a little more tricks to it than the video you saw where they were actually painting. This one you use other things, other non-traditional tools, but very classic. So I have 9 little squares that I've pre-painted with a surface of color so that the next layer of texture you put on looks a little richer and a little more interesting. Just on white, it doesn't work that great. So the first one I'm going to show you is very classic watercolor technique, and I have yellow on there in kind of a thinner layer, and any color you want as long as it's contrasting. If I put white over it, it wouldn't show very much, but you know, a darker color of some kind. I'm going to use red, and the second layer should be really watery because the salt kind of absorbs into the surface. It's a little too thick. So you have puddles, and then you take some salt. You don't have to put it on really thick, and just lay it on there, and let that sit for a while. I'll go back to that later, so I'm going to put that over here. And now with the salt, you can just let it sit. You know, do it all up an hour later. Next day, come back to it. If you want to just let it sit, that's usually the best. But if you want to dry it with a hairdryer. Just don't touch it, even once you put it on and it's not quite in the right place you think or something. Don't try to smush it around because it'll get absorbed. The water will dissolve it. So just leave it the way it is and take the time to dry it. Okay, so it's not dry yet, but you'll know it's dry if you try to move it and it still moves. Like there, I have a little spot where it's moving and it's still wet. You don't want to do anything yet. Over here it's a little drier, maybe it was a little thinner water. That doesn't move very much, so I still need to, you don't want it to move at all. It sticks on like it's been glued on. Okay, so it's not going anywhere. But you can rub it off. And you get the illusion of bumps. Now if this was an actual orange or maybe even an apple, it'd have that little bit of a mottled effect in it. Another easy one to do is to just blot the paint. Now I've got paper towels, but you could use Kleenexes. They're softer, they give a different effect. Really stiff cloth, that gives another different effect. Anything that you can see blotting off the paint with. So I'm going to, again, another watery layer on top of this dry. All these pre-painted layers should be perfectly bone dry. So I'm going to lay some paint down on here. And then just take whatever you're going to blot with, press down, and it's a very soft effect in this case, but if you have stiffer fabric or whatever, it might give you harder edges. Very soft. Next is cardboard, and I have some corrugated cardboard and some stiff watercolor paper, even fatter cardboard, thinner cardboard, but it's a way to make lines that no brush can make, really. I'm going to take your paint and smooth it out a little bit so you can get a space of paint big enough. Dip the cardboard into the paint and just, see, with corrugated you have those the outside paper and then the little thing in the middle that makes kind of the S marks. So that gives you a good effect. Thinner cardboard. Thinner cardboard, this happens all the time. Get thinner lines, great for grass or hair. You can bend it. And get little arches. These make great fish scales. If you drew an outline of a fish and then did this inside the fish, you'd have all the fish scales you need, and then just paint them. I could sharpen it, like a corner. Sometimes, you know, the textures you make resemble things, like the one I do with the salt. It might resemble the skin of an orange or something if you want to use it for something representational, or you can just create really cool patterns. So we'll set that one aside. Plastic wrap, bubble wrap, any kind of plastic bag, Target plastic bag, anything that's plastic will work. Again, perfectly dry there, and a thin watery layer over that. And brush water over it. And then you just lay the saran wrap down or whatever and crinkle it up. And that has to sit till it's perfectly dry as well, or the effect won't happen. But pretty easy there. Dry brush, when you paint a wall and you dip the brush in the bucket of paint, it gets good coverage, and as the paint leaves the brush, you get grainy, you get the wall texture coming through. This is the same thing, but you want to start out with less paint on the brush. So you have to dip the brush into the paint and paint a few strokes on a piece of scrap paper or something so you don't have a lot of paint on it, and then it's just what it sounds like. It's a dry brush. You get a real grainy kind of texture to it. Depending on the kind of brush you use, this is picking up the texture of the paper too, but you'll get a, it's great for making hair or wood grain, or just kind of an over texture, give it some zip, some electricity. Sponges. I have makeup sponges. They're very fine little sponges, but a kitchen sponge, you could cut that into different shapes. Ones with bigger holes in, sea sponges. They should be wet first, so soak them in water and then wring them out. And this one has a little shape to it, which is kind of cool. So, hey, look at that, cool. This one is triangular on one side, but I could also make rectangles. I'll try a triangle. If I take another cover over the top. Fun. So if you don't have makeup sponges, they're pretty cheap, but you could cut a shape out of any sponge. Scraping, again with cardboard or a credit card or a razor blade. This time the paint can be thicker. Real watery works, but it's just a little messier. It doesn't have quite the same effect, so I'm going to have a little bit of a thicker application of paint here. That's pretty thick. And with my razor blade, I can scrape little marks, big marks, swirly marks. If you don't like something, well, you can just paint through it again. I'm going to try this cardboard. Scrape through the whole thing. That gives you kind of an overall, not quite pink, not quite white, not flat, interesting effect. I like this. It looks like a basket weave. Twist, twist, twist. So something that's got a hard edge to it. Okay, so toothbrushes you can use to splatter paint. You can do it just randomly. You can get stencils. You can make your own stencil. You can lay leaves down or sticks or anything that'll act as a block to the splatter. You can do multiple colors. I've got black right here, but you could use do black first, then do red over the top, slightly shift it, but you get a really cool pattern that way. You could also use your sponge for the same effect on a stencil. But make sure you blot, don't wipe. It'll push the paint under the stencil and it'll blob up. You don't want to push through. And with a brush too, you want to, this is a special stencil brush, but any brush you use, you don't want to paint with it. You want to blot with it. And make sure the paint's not real watery because it'll just seep underneath the stencil. You want it to be kind of thick. Ah, that one worked. Yay. Alright, so that's the stencil. Masking tape, I guess, is the last one. So masking tape, I've just masked off areas, so whatever I do with the paint, when I take the masking tape off, those areas will still be red. So you can cut masking tape to different sizes. You could make really fine lines with it. I could make it into shapes if I wanted to spend that time doing it. Here it's painted. And here you can use a spongy effect. I could use the toothbrush. I could use all kinds of things. A mask is it's just what it is. It's a mask. It covers up parts you don't want to have be covered. So that has to dry. I always pull it off at early just to see where it's at on that. Sometimes I have luck pulling the tape off and sometimes I don't, so we'll see.